The Hand Trowel. Small enough to fit in a single palm, yet capable of handling more daily tasks than almost any other tool in a garden shed, the hand trowel earns its place as the single most reached-for implement any gardener owns. Its narrow, scoop-shaped metal blade, tapering to a rounded or pointed tip depending on the design, slices easily through loosened soil to dig the small, precise holes needed for transplanting seedlings, tucking in bulbs, or working soil amendments directly around an established plant's root zone. A quality trowel depends heavily on the strength of the joint where the metal blade meets the handle, since that connection point takes the brunt of the leverage applied every time the tool pries against compacted or rocky ground, and a cheaply welded union is almost always the first thing to fail. Beyond digging, the trowel doubles as a measuring tool for planting depth, a weed extraction lever for stubborn taproots, and even a makeshift cultivator for breaking up the surface crust that forms on container soil between waterings. Gardeners who invest in one forged from a single solid piece of stainless steel rather than a cheaper stamped and riveted design typically find the tool lasting for decades rather than snapping at the handle within a single demanding season. Handle shape matters more than most first-time buyers expect, since a rounded ergonomic grip reduces the blistering and hand fatigue that comes from repeated digging sessions, an advantage easy to dismiss until an entire afternoon of container planting is already underway. The pruning shears. Also known as secateurs, pruning shears handle the enormous share of routine cutting that keeps a garden looking deliberate rather than overgrown, snipping through stems, small branches, and spent flowers with a single squeeze of the hand. Bypass shears, the most common design, work like a pair of scissors, with two curved blades sliding cleanly past each other to produce a precise cut that seals quickly and minimizes damage to the surrounding living tissue. A second, less common design, called anvil shears, instead brings a single sharp blade down against a flat metal plate, a mechanism better suited to cutting dry, dead wood, but prone to crushing rather than cleanly slicing through softer living stems. Every entry on this list gets its own dedicated deep dive with buying advice and technique breakdowns over on Garden's Lab, with a new tool profile posted every few days for anyone slowly building out a complete garden shed. Keeping the blades genuinely sharp matters more than most beginners realize, since a dull pair of shears crushes plant tissue rather than cutting it cleanly, leaving a ragged wound that heals slowly and invites disease directly into the plant. Hand size and grip strength also factor heavily into choosing the right pair, since shears sized for a larger hand often feel awkward and difficult to fully close for someone with smaller hands, an easily overlooked detail that makes an enormous difference across hours of repeated harvesting or deadheading. The garden fork. Built with four sturdy, closely spaced metal tines mounted on a long handle, the garden fork excels at a job the smooth, flat blade of a spade genuinely struggles with, breaking apart and aerating soil that has become compacted, rocky, or thick with tangled roots. Driving the tines straight down and then levering the handle backward lifts and loosens a section of ground far more effectively than any flat-bladed tool could manage, using the gardener's own body weight as leverage rather than raw arm strength alone. That same lifting action makes the fork the tool of choice for dividing overgrown perennial clumps, since the tines slide between root masses and pry sections apart with far less damage than a sharp spade blade would cause by cutting straight through the root ball. A cheaply made fork with thin, poorly forged tines is one of the fastest tools in any shed to fail outright, since the twisting leverage applied against rocky or root-bound soil puts enormous strain directly on the tines and the joint connecting them to the handle. Turning a compost pile is another job the fork handles better than almost anything else available, its open tine structure sliding through loose, decomposing material without the resistance a solid-bladed shovel would create. Harvesting root vegetables like potatoes and carrots also favors the fork over a spade, since the gaps between tines let a gardener lift an entire section of soil around a buried crop while sliding past the vegetable itself rather than risking slicing straight through it. The spade. distinguished from a shovel by its flat, sharp-edged, typically square or slightly rounded blade. The spade specializes in precise, clean-edged digging, rather than the scooping and moving that shovels handle more naturally. That flat cutting edge makes the spade the definitive tool for creating crisp bed edges, slicing straight down through turf and soil in a single motion to establish the clean boundary line separating a garden bed from surrounding lawn. Digging holes for trees and shrubs also favors the spade over other digging tools, since its straight sides carve a hole with vertical walls rather than the sloped, cone-shaped hole a rounded shovel tends to produce. The spade's flat blade doubles effectively as a root-cutting tool, capable of slicing directly through smaller roots encountered mid-dig rather than requiring a separate saw or pruning tool to clear the obstruction. Longer handles generally translate into more digging leverage and less strain on the lower back, which is why many experienced gardeners deliberately choose a full-length spade over a shorter, more compact version despite the reduced portability that extra length brings. Stepping directly onto the top edge of the blade, sometimes reinforced with a wider tread specifically for this purpose, lets a gardener use body weight rather than arm strength alone to drive the spade through compacted or rocky ground that would otherwise resist a simple downward push. The Garden Hoe, built around a flat, wide blade set at an angle to a long handle, the Garden Hoe tackles weed control and soil surface work, standing fully upright, sparing the back and knees the strain that low, hands-on weeding otherwise demands. Dragging the blade just beneath the soil surface slices through the roots of young weeds efficiently, killing them before they ever develop the deeper root systems that make later removal considerably more difficult. Beyond simple weeding, a hoe shapes shallow furrows for planting seeds in a neat, evenly spaced row and mounds soil up around the base of crops like potatoes that specifically benefit from that extra covering as they develop underground. A wide-bladed hoe suits open ground between established rows, while a narrower blade maneuvers more precisely between closely spaced plants without accidentally slicing through anything meant to stay in the ground. Timing matters considerably with this tool, since hoeing weeds while they are still small seedlings takes a fraction of the effort required once the same weeds have matured and anchored themselves with a deeper, more established root system. A stirrup-shaped hoe, sometimes called a scuffle hoe, cuts on both the push and pull stroke rather than only one direction, roughly doubling the ground a gardener can clear in the same amount of time compared to a traditional single-direction blade. The Garden Rake. Fitted with a row of rigid metal teeth spanning a wide head, the Garden Rake handles the surface-level tasks that come immediately before and after almost every other job in the garden, leveling loose soil, clearing fallen leaves and debris, and spreading a fresh layer of mulch or compost evenly across a bed. Preparing ground for seeds depends heavily on this tool, since dragging the rake back and forth breaks up small clumps and smooths the surface into the fine, even texture tiny seeds need for reliable germination and even root contact. A separate, lighter version built with flexible, fan-shaped tins handles. Leaf collection specifically, its springy design gathering loose material efficiently without gouging or damaging the lawn or soil surface underneath. Heavier, rigid-tined rakes intended for soil work demand considerably more durability in their construction, since dragging metal teeth repeatedly through compacted or rocky ground puts real strain on both the tines themselves and the connection joining them to the handle. A garden rake also serves as a rough measuring guide when spacing out seeds or seedlings, its evenly spaced teeth providing a quick visual reference for consistent planting intervals across an entire row. The Wheelbarrow. Built around a single front wheel in a wide, shallow tray, the wheelbarrow solves the fundamental problem every gardener eventually runs into: moving heavy, bulky material like soil, mulch, and harvested produce across uneven ground without a straight back complaining the entire way. The single-wheel design offers tight maneuverability through narrow garden paths and around raised beds where a wider, multi-wheeled cart simply would not fit, though that same single point of contact demands more balance in practice from the person pushing it. Steel tray wheelbarrows handle heavier loads and rougher terrain more reliably over time, while lighter plastic or poly trays resist rust entirely and cost considerably less. A trade-off most home gardeners weigh directly against how frequently and how heavily the tool actually gets used. Loading a wheelbarrow correctly matters more than most beginners expect, since piling weight too far forward over the wheel makes the load nearly impossible to lift and steer, while weight concentrated too far back toward the handles strains the arms and shoulders unnecessarily throughout every trip. For truly heavy, repeated hauling across a larger property, many experienced gardeners eventually graduate to a two-wheeled garden cart instead, trading some of the wheelbarrow's tight maneuverability for considerably greater stability and load capacity. Pneumatic, air-filled tires roll more smoothly across grass and uneven paths than solid rubber alternatives, though they also carry the added maintenance risk of a puncture at the worst possible moment mid-project. The Loppers. Resembling an oversized pair of pruning shears mounted on long handles, Loppers exist specifically to bridge the gap between what hand shears can comfortably cut and what actually requires a dedicated pruning saw. Where standard pruning shears typically top out at branches around 3/4 of an inch thick, Loppers extend that cutting capacity up to nearly 2 inches in diameter, their long handles generating substantially more leverage than any hand tool could produce on its own. That extra reach also matters just as much as the added cutting power, letting a gardener trim branches deep inside a dense shrub or high on a small tree without needing a ladder or an awkward off-balance stretch. Like their smaller hand pruner relatives, Loppers come in both bypass and anvil designs, and the same trade-off applies at this larger scale. Bypass blades slicing cleanly through living wood while anvil blades handle dry, dead branches more efficiently. Because Loppers regularly tackle the thickest material any hand-cutting tool is expected to manage, blade sharpness and overall build quality matter enormously, and a dull or poorly made pair frequently crushes and splinters a branch rather than delivering the single clean cut a healthy plant needs to recover quickly. Handle length varies considerably between models, and while a longer handle generates more cutting leverage for thicker branches, it also adds weight and reduces control in tight spaces, meaning many gardeners eventually keep two different sized pairs on hand for different jobs around the same property.